Alright, wish me luck. I've sorted out about 14 minutes of recording time on my phone. I need to go in and empty out a whole bunch of ancient pictures and stuff, but let's see if I can get what I have to say out and hopefully not overrun myself. It's been a minute since I've done one of these, a couple of nights, and hopefully refreshed a little bit. I ended up talking with a coworker today, kind of randomly, about consequentialism versus deontological ethics, or deontology. And the difference is that consequentialism states that the morality of an action is based on the outcomes of the action, and deontology states that regardless of the outcomes of an action, regardless of the outcomes, an action is moral or not, depending on largely a set of rules. So I think the example he brought up was, if you randomly walk down the street and kill somebody, but that saves two people from being killed, does that mean you're a moral net good? Deontology says no, because killing people is bad, so that was a bad action. Even though not doing so would lead to two more people dying. And consequentialism, it's vague and fuzzy. It's probably vague and fuzzy for deontology. I haven't studied that nearly as much because I consider myself something of a consequentialist. So the glib, quick way that Americans define consequentialism, or I think that most Western, not particularly philosophically robust people, robust, that's the wrong term, not particularly philosophically minded people, the kind of people who don't spend too much time arguing about this sort of thing, would define what I guess pop philosophy thinks of consequentialism with the phrase, the ends justify the means. And while what that usually means in common parlance, the way people use that phrase usually means that the morality of your actions depends on the morality of your goals, given that your goals are achieved. And what the hell's going on with the white balance on here? I need to take a look at the camera. It's being green and weird. I swear it's not nearly as green as it looks. Oh, slow traffic ahead. Interesting. This could get fun. Consequentialism, stuff and things. What was I talking about? Oh, glibly speaking, most people would define it as the ends justify the means, which it's my understanding that means that the morality of your actions is determined by the moral weight of your goals. And I think that this sort of belies a deep flaw in modern Western thought, and that is an ignorance of side effects and external costs. The way I see it, the moral definition of, or the moral weight determination of a given action depends on all the outcomes of that action. I do consider myself a consequentialist, and it's not just that, on the net this and that happened, but for that, let's see. I suppose why I'm doing this vlog in the first place is so that I can sort my thoughts out more easily. So we have the scenario he gave. Let's see, a serial killer walks along the road, kills a random person, but that ends up saving two people's lives in a definite way. Is that a moral action? I would say that in general, killing people is not preferred because that conflicts with my utility function, and that's getting into an entirely different series of meta-ethics, which I'm not going to go into because I'm not an ethicist. I will leave that to the actually experienced people. Those people really want to hear me attempt to regurgitate poorly digested bits of meta-ethical theory. But assuming that we agree that murder is bad, which we'll start with that agreement, murder is bad. So there is at first a negative cost on the moral weight of this action because there was a murder. If that prevents two more murders, then that's good for those two people. It's still bad for the person who died. So I wouldn't say that it's unqualified good. I'd say that on the whole, things turned out a little better, but that doesn't mean you should just go around killing people at random. How often does killing people at random save lives? I actually don't know. I would assume not very often, but I could actually be wrong about that. Bringing it back down, we can't just look at what we were intending to do or what our goal was when assessing the moral weight of our decisions. We have to look at everything that happened as a result. Just to say, I don't think that actions are moral or ethical just because. I don't think that behavior X is ethical, therefore whenever you do X, it's a good thing. I don't think that's right. I define myself as a consequentialist, and I think that the determinant of morality, what actually tells us whether or not what you did was correct behavior, is the net result of everything, or the total result of your actions. So it's not just, is the goal moral, therefore everything is good. It's, are the results of your actions good to determine whether or not what you did is right. This probably leads into discussions on meta-ethics and decision theory regarding why you would value some things over other things. It's possible to argue that all of these fall underneath some greater meta-ethical concern, and that on some level they both fit together for, maximizing utility functions. In which case the argument becomes about what is the utility function we should be using. And I think I'm headed into new cognitive territory for me. So I kind of wish I had someone else here to bounce off of. But I'll try. We'll see. We'll muddle through. Let's see what we come up with. Or not. Maybe I've hit a dead end. Maybe I oversimplified. I think there's a point where you can class things together so much that it ceases to be useful. So it's possible that what I've actually done is move the question away from consequentialism versus deontology and into the meta-ethical question of why one utility function is better than another. So going back down to consequentialism, I think I've said all I need to say, right? The rant, I guess, is that there's this belief that moral theory is that the ends justify the means. And the way people interpret that, to me, or it seems to me that the way people interpret that is that the goals of your action determine the moral valuation of your action. Which means you can do anything as long as it gets you where you're going. And I think that the way we evaluate actions using that axiom is very short-sighted and doesn't account for external costs. This ties into a number of videos back. I talked about market economies and how I'm not a socialist. I believe in a market economy or some form of capitalism with a sizable welfare state and robust government regulation. I've made the comparison before, although only to myself, that capitalism is not unlike fire in that it's a tool. A capitalist market system is a tool for a robust, growing economy. And like fire, it can be used to generate a lot of good things. Like fire, if left unrestrained, it leads to massive destruction and entropy. I think it's a very good analogy. And I think the people I know who are so strongly opposed are opposed on ideological grounds almost to the word capitalism, because it's so entrenched in our culture that capitalism means almost objectivism, like broad, and it means, you know, extremely rich people screwing over everyone else to make themselves richer, is I think what our culture sees capitalism as meaning. And I don't feel that way, and maybe I need a new word because it's been so hopelessly ruined by the bad kind of libertarian, as it were. I don't know. To tie it back to the ends justifying the means, I think that externalities wonder how much of that I'm going to keep in the long run. We'll find out. Probably not much. I totally recorded an awesome rant and I got rolling on stuff, and then everything was like going well, and I wrapped everything up and I looked over and I was like, well, I might as well just end it here. So I finished what I was saying and I went to hit stop and I realized that I had overrun my allotted time. I haven't gone back and reviewed that, so I don't actually know where I got cut off. Which means you get a totally unrelated discussion of something else entirely right now. We'll go back to RPGs. A friend of mine is putting together a Dungeons & Dragons game and invited me to play. And I'm pretty stoked about it. I don't know if there's like a rule I've broken, or if this is acceptable behavior, but I'm resurrecting an old character for it. What is this focus? Thank you. Yeah, maybe. Maybe not. Maybe it's focusing on the windscreen. Oh well. Maybe they'll just strip the audio and it'll just be podcasts. That'll work too. So a friend of mine starting a Dungeons & Dragons game and told me what he was looking for, and I decided not to do that partially on his insistence because he really liked the sound of my character. I didn't have anything I was particularly excited about, but in a previous game, I had been flipping through the Pathfinder rulebook and reading, I think, the Bard entry. It talked about bards of what basically amount to non-standard races. And reading that, I had the idea of a Goblin Bard. And it might have explicitly mentioned them, I don't recall. And so I thought, what would a Goblin Bard be like? And I put together a rough character sketch of someone who might have been a bard, or why a goblin became an adventuring bard, and then started playing. And I don't think I did much with the character at the time, but the concept was still kind of neat, playing war drums, and I don't think I ever got really detailed with my plans as far as what weapons I was going to use, what other things, but I ended up specializing in drums, because a bard should always specialize in their primary instrument, and calligraphy, and decided to make the character a story collector. And I put together a history of a goblin who had been, for whatever reason, kidnapped and as an infant and raised as a servant in a drow household, learned to sing, then escaped, and eventually got picked up by a human bard who taught her, proper bard lore and how to be a bard. I also went with a female because of some flippant comment about you wouldn't even know if you weren't already a goblin. Because you wouldn't. Non-goblin races don't tend to think of the goblins as people that they have to interact with. They think of them as pests that have to be eradicated or kept out of the cities. So, unless you'd spent a lot of time around goblins, you wouldn't even know the difference or what to look for. So I picked a female just to throw things into a wrench. So she learned bardic ways and decided to collect goblin stories, and that was my character hook. And we did 2 sessions, I think, and then things kind of didn't keep going because the group couldn't always meet at the same time, and that's how it goes. But I liked the character concept, and I thought it turned out pretty well, so I kept using it. This current DM is the sort of person who is around the kind of player who's into, and is the kind of player who is into min-maxing, and so is naturally completely baffled by the concept of a goblin bard, since goblins have a natural detriment to charisma. I like to play challenge characters who are in some way hampered, but in a way that makes an interesting story. Like, I think the Goblin Bard is an interesting story, and I can tell neat stories about said creature. So that kind of, handicap, if you will, on having that natural detriment to charisma, so I'm not as good at Bard as, say, a human would be with my same stat spread, challenges me as a gamer more than crafting the character that has all of the max stats. I think it is an experiment in actually doing that, min-maxing. I'll probably put together a Goblin Wizard, because goblins don't suffer a detriment to intelligence and do have a massive boost in the terms of not getting hit. What with being tiny, well, not technically small, but what with being small, fast, and with a dexterity bonus. The Bard's an interesting character, and I like to play characters who are challenges to play. Another character that I did, I put together using the D&D 3.5 NPC class Adept, which is deliberately underpowered, balanced against the standard classes because it's an NPC class, though has the curious advantage of a customized class skill list. So the point of an adept is to be a skill hoarder and just have tons and tons of skill points. So I put points in charisma and intelligence and made a traitor slash diplomat who ended up stopping multiple encounters by convincing everyone not to fight, and I think ended the game with a fairly massive coterie of slaves and hangers-on who carried all of his associated shenanigans. This is about where I normally end off the night, so I'll just kind of finish it here. Good night. Talk to you next time. I don't know.